Hi, I'm Phil Winborn. Most of you know that. On behalf of the Friends of Sharon Center, Friends of Sharon Community Center, we're happy to welcome you to this historic building. We're celebrating Sharon High School today. To give you a little bit of background, this building was conceived and built by a group of about 20 community Sharon Center members who organized a private corporation selling shares to erect this building in 1899. It was to be used as a high school and for community events. So here we are again. The year was 1898. A 4-month high school term had successfully been held in the upstairs of the Miller store, which was down in the corner. Sharon's 2-year course of high school was in operation here from 1899 until 1912. When the revenue from tuitions dwindled and could no longer support the school. By 1918, the corporation's 20-year term had run out. In 1918, Frank Pierce Masonic Lodge, Fellowship Lodge was begun in Frank Pierce, which was Frighttown, and they bought the building from the original stockholders for a sum of $275. For several years, Sharon had no high school, but then in 1923, the high school was reopened in the upstairs of the Berkey store, and in 1924, the first floor of this building was rented out to the school. I thought so too. By 1926, a 4-year course of high school was offered, and by 1930, the school had outgrown the building, and so the community started fundraising for a new building across the road. The last high school classes were held here in 1931, and the last Sharon High School class graduated from the new building in '44. Marge graduated in 1939, and Alice graduated in 1942.
I'd like you to check your cell phones so we don't have them ringing. And if you didn't get a sign in, I'd like you to sign your name so we know that you've been here. And if you'd like more news about us having another event by the Friends of Sharon Community Center. And our host today is Ron Stutzman, who provided refreshments. It's not often that we get to hear about your high school days from people who graduated in 1939 or 1942. But that's today's topic with Marjorie Schwimley Miller and Alice Winborn Thompson. Phil calls her Aunt Alice all the time, so I'm tempted to call her Aunt Alice too, even though her name's Alice. Yeah. The Lodge building where we are sitting was erected in 1899 to house the first high school for rural Sharon Center community families. After the initial 2-year course of study ended around 1912, the Frighttown Lodge purchased the building. So a new high school then was built across the road in 1930 to accommodate the expanding program, the expanding wishes of the community. And Marjorie, Alice, and dozens of other teenagers attended that high school through 1944. Our program today will include memories that they have, stories of a typical high school day, their extracurricular activities, the fundraising they had to do to keep the school afloat, and the local history. We're going to hear from these gals for the first hour or two, and then we'd like to open it up and have more comments and stories from the rest of you. So, thank you for allowing us to ask you all these questions.
Well, thank you for asking us. You know, I just realized recently that I did graduate from Sharon High School 80 years ago last May. And you know, if I'd known then that I would be talking to a group of people 80 years later about my high school days, I would have taken some notes. However, I did not, so today I'll be wing it. And I hope you enjoy our little presentation and be sure to ask questions all along. But we think we should start out by telling you a little history about Sharon Township. I don't know how many know that Sharon Township did not always exist. I don't know when they laid out the townships. Are you, Alice? I don't know this.
When did this, we had statehood in what, 1846?
I don't know when they laid out the townships,
I
but
know
originally.
we were a territory when a lot of this was done.
Right. But Sharon Township did not exist until 1858. Originally, Sharon Township was part of Washington Township and Liberty. Now, it's a long ways from the west part of Washington Township, way out west of Freytown, and Liberty goes way east of Hills. So in 1858, February 1st, 1858, it says, "And now on this day comes George T. Davis, Esquire, and presents a petition signed by himself and other citizens residing in Township 78 North of Range 7 West of the 5th p.m., asking the county to form a new township for civil purposes, embracing the boundaries of said original surveyed township to be called Sharon Township." So at that point, they decided, Josiah Guffin was the chairman of the first township meeting. J.P. Rockwell was the first township clerk. And the first officers were J.J. Durst, John Bitterball, and R.M. Johnson, trustee, G.R. Hall, clerk, J.R. Roberts, assessor, B.N. Ford, and T.D. Davis, and August Zager, constables. Now, quite a few, there are descendants in this area from these people. I think they said, okay, we're going to form a new township. We've got to have a name for this. What shall we name it? We don't know, but some of us think Josiah Guffin was my husband's great grandfather. And they had come from Sharon, New York, 4 years prior. They came in 1854. So don't you think he probably said, well, how does Sharon sound? That's what I think 4 years later. So we don't know, but we think maybe that's why it was named Sharon. So I do have a few copies. If anyone wants a copy of this, I have a few, or I could make more. So let me know if you want any more copies. The first business was a small store before 1879, owned by Ezra Yoder. He had a huckster wagon that went out. Does anybody want to know what a huckster wagon is? It was a wagon that pulled by a heavy wagon, pulled by a team of horses that had dry goods and staple flour, rice, things like that.
Doors on both sides, double doors on both sides, and in the back, shelves.
And as they called for each family in the township, perhaps once a week, perhaps, they would buy eggs and put them on the top of the wagon.
And chickens. And chickens, they would take chickens.
Did they?
Yeah.
Dead or alive?
Alive.
Well, anyway, I think the huckster wagon operated. There was another one out of Sharon, I think, and one out of Hills. And I think the last huckster wagon closed down in 1924, I think, read somewhere. The post office was in the Sharon store to start with. Other than, before that, people had to go to Iowa City to pick up their mail. And there was a doctor's office next door to the first store. And it was in the northeast section of the crossroads of Sharon, the first store.
That was just about right straight across from here, probably, pretty close, maybe a little bit to the west.
Well, it was to the west, the crossroad.
Yeah.
Then Mr. Miller built the new store across the road, and that's when they had the first high school, it's still red, in the upstairs of that store, which was a trial run, a 4-month trial high school. And it was very successful. So that, they collected money and built this building the next year. Alice, do you want to carry on now from there?
Well, no, go ahead, whatever you're going to say about the community.
Well, let's see. The first church was built in 1866 in Sharon Township. That was the Evangelical Church that I still attend. 1875, St. John Lutheran Church, which is south. That was built in 1875. First telephone was in the late 1800s. 3 families, Noah Yoder, Frank Sayre, and Charlie Zager, the 3 families, decided to, they hooked up wires, even barbed wire, then later on, we had, by 1914, another company was formed. The Sharon Garage, everyone that grew up knew about the Sharon Garage that Cy Bredeman. Cy didn't build it, but he bought it a year or so after it was built and maintained it for many, many years. Cy would buy, he would fix anything broken, and I think they'd go to ask him what the charge was, and he said, oh, maybe $1, you know, no matter what it was. The first rock from what was #1 going through Sharon Center, it used to be highway #1. First rock put from Sharon Center to the new school, it was built in 1930, was put on the road in 1934. So they built that school with just a mud road.
And it was mud.
So it was. That's quite a bit about the Sharon Township, I think, an early start.
Well, that brings us up to the school, and I'm just looking at, in the high school, the beginning of what's now the Blue Book, from the August 1944 Iowa City Press Citizen, G.M. Ludwig, who had been the first superintendent of the permanent 4-year high school, was still living in Iowa City, I think. No, I don't know where he lived.
He lived at Parsons, Lutheran Parsons.
No, in his retirement.
Oh.
Because this was after it closed. He said, the history of the Sharon High School is unique and interesting. Its plan of organization, its method of operation, its usual undertakings and achievements have attracted the wide attention. All of Johnson County and adjoining counties have participated in its oxros. Schools all over the state have felt the scourge of its basketball teams. Adjoining towns hired the services of its band. And we had a big band, up to 50 people at one point. Officials in Des Moines have stood and watched, vacillating frequently from one position during which they heaped upon the school letters of commendation and praise to another position when they send inquiries as to justification for its existence. An academy was in operation at Sharon a generation ago. Well, that's what Marjorie's reading about. However, the requirements could not be met, and this institution of learning closed its doors. But a desire on the part of the people of Sharon Township to give its youth a secondary education at home continued to persist. In the fall of 1924, this attitude was expressed to me in the words of Mr. John Winborn, that was my dad. He said, we want to educate our children right here at home. If we send them to town, we will lose them to the community forever. The success of this school throughout the last several decades has justified Mr. Winborn's vision. Today, the Sharon community, as progressive and prosperous a community as can be found anywhere in Iowa, is operated and controlled by the graduates of Sharon High School. Mr. Winborn's ideal has been literally fulfilled. Just the other day, I discovered that his oldest boy, Everett, and that's Phil's dad, will now take over the full operation of the Winborn Farms. And his father will retire